The tablet wasn't supposed to exist. When it emerged from the desert sands of Iraq in 1923, it challenged everything historians believed about the dawn of civilization. The Sumerian king list, a record carved in stone claiming the first rulers of Mesopotamia, reigned for impossible lengths: 28,800 years, 36,000 years, 200 years. Not days, not months, years. Time stretched beyond human comprehension, with 8 kings ruling for a combined 241,200 years before a great flood swept across the land. Scholars dismissed it as mythology, religious hyperbole from mankind's first great civilization, a primitive people exaggerating to glorify their ancestors. But they never explained the precision, the mathematical patterns hidden within those impossibly long reigns, the correlation between cosmic cycles and royal successions that no ancient human should have comprehended. What if these weren't the boastful claims of an emerging culture, but coordinates in time? What if the king list wasn't recording history, but encoding something else? A message about reality itself? The forbidden archives of the British Museum hold fragments scholars refuse to translate, lines that speak not of kings who ruled, but of something far more unsettling: beings who created. What if the oldest text in human possession isn't describing our past, but revealing our present illusion? Mesopotamia, 4500 BCE. Between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, humanity's first civilization rose from fertile mud. Here, the Sumerians invented writing, mathematics, astronomy, and perhaps most importantly, the concept of time itself. The original tablet of the king list was discovered in the ruins of Nippur, one of Sumer's oldest sacred cities. But it wasn't alone. Thousands of clay tablets emerged from temple archives, speaking of beings called the Anunnaki, those who from heaven came to earth, the gods who supposedly created humans to serve them. When the first archaeologists handled these tablets, many reported unusual sensations. A British museum curator wrote in his private journal, "When I first touched the fragment listing the pre-flood kings, I felt it watching me. The sensation persisted for days afterward, as if time itself had become conscious of my intrusion." The Sumerians weren't primitive people telling fanciful stories. They were sophisticated astronomers who tracked celestial patterns with alarming precision. They understood eclipse cycles centuries before the Greeks. They mapped stars no human eye could see without technology. Their mathematics used a sexagesimal system, base 60, which we still use today for measuring time and astronomical coordinates. Yet mainstream archaeology insists on viewing the king list as mere mythology, refusing to address the mathematical perfection in those mythical reigns. Each king's rule precisely aligns with cosmic cycles, sharp periods of 3,600 years that correspond to orbital patterns no ancient human should have known. The temple where the king list was stored wasn't just a religious center. According to untranslated texts, it was called Abzu, House of the Deep Knowledge. Inscriptions describe it as a place where the ME were guarded, the ME being mysterious objects or codes containing all knowledge of civilization and reality's structure. What consciousness conceived of reality as programmable 6,000 years ago, when the rest of humanity had barely discovered pottery? In 1956, a fragment of the king list previously hidden in private collections arrived at the University of Pennsylvania. Unlike other fragments, this one bore damage that wasn't natural erosion. Deliberate tool marks scarred the cuneiform, methodically erasing specific names and numbers. The archaeological team noted something unprecedented: traces of gold in the grooves where text had been removed, as if whatever was erased was first covered in precious metal before being obliterated. Why would ancient scribes meticulously gild information only to destroy it? The king list exists in multiple versions across different time periods, each showing subtle alterations, not copying errors, but deliberate reprogramming of the historical narrative. The earliest versions contain more kings, more details, and most disturbingly, different descriptions of how civilization began. The standard translation taught in universities tells us the familiar phrase, "when kingship descended from heaven," but alternative fragments unearthed in the 1970s reveal a different phrasing, "when perception was altered and kingship imposed upon men." This revelation split the academic community. Orthodox archaeologists dismissed the translations as speculative. 3 leading linguists who insisted on publishing papers about these alternative fragments found their careers suddenly stalled. One reportedly destroyed his notes after claiming to receive night visits from tall figures speaking an unknown language. In the British Museum's restricted collection lies tablet K4023, mentioned in catalogs but never displayed, its contents only partially translated. The fragment contains a passage that appears to describe the actual mechanism through which these god kings maintained their impossibly long reigns. The Anunnaki renewed their appearances through the sacred MEs, while mankind remembered nothing. This suggests not mythological longevity, but technological transfer of consciousness. Identity sustained across multiple bodies while human perception was manipulated to see continuity. A hidden codex within temple ritual texts describes devices called crown lamps that could adjust the flowing experience of time and reset the memories of the black-headed people, the Sumerian term for ordinary humans. The designs match no known ancient technology, but resemble modern concepts of neurological interfaces. The mathematical structure of the king list becomes more unsettling under computational analysis. When the reign lengths are processed as code rather than chronology, they form patterns identifiable as error correction algorithms similar to those used in quantum computing. Oxford mathematician James Wilson identified this pattern in 2008, but withdrew his paper after receiving funding from an anonymous foundation. What appears as mythological exaggeration to conventional historians looks remarkably like a periodic system reboot to information theorists. The most troubling evidence comes from genetic research. The Human Genome Project unexpectedly discovered what geneticist Dr. Elena Kovalev called edit markers, places in human DNA showing signs of precise modification rather than evolutionary mutation. These markers correspond to the timing of the appearance of modern Homo sapiens, the same biological event the Sumerians attributed to the Anunnaki creating humans in their image. These genetic anomalies show sophisticated engineering beyond any ancient capability. Yet the Sumerian creation text, the Enuma Elish, describes the process in recognizable terms. Mixing the blood of a fallen god with Earth's clay, Enki established the pattern of thinking beings. The pattern described uses terminology that, when translated with computer linguistics rather than classical methods, bears unsettling similarity to descriptions of genetic programming. The king list doesn't just challenge our understanding of history. It suggests history itself is an agreed-upon illusion, periodically reset when too many humans begin noticing inconsistencies in reality's fabric. In 2019, a team using ground-penetrating radar in northern Iraq detected anomalous structures beneath the ancient city of Eridu, supposedly the first city where kingship descended. The structures form geometric patterns that match no known architectural style from any period. At the center lies a chamber the team's leader described as a perfect cube, its dimensions corresponding exactly to the mathematical ratios encoded in the king list. Excavation permits were suddenly revoked. The team's funding disappeared. 3 members reported their research computers were stolen, and 1 claimed government agents confiscated all their data. What civilization builds perfect geometric structures, buries them deep underground, and then creates an entirely different city on top, as if intentionally hiding evidence of what came before? The Sumerians had no word for fiction. Everything they wrote, they considered truth. Their world didn't distinguish between the physical and metaphysical. Both were equally real, equally programmable. Their gods weren't supernatural beings, but engineers of reality itself. The most carefully protected section of the king list describes not kings, but intervals, periods called great years, when the heavens completed their circle and consciousness returned to its beginning. These cycles align precisely with astronomical phenomena only recently rediscovered: the precession of the equinoxes and the solar system's transit through the galaxy's electromagnetic bands. How did the world's first civilization possess knowledge that modern science only confirmed in the last century? The answer may lie in what's been systematically erased from the king list, not by ancient hands, but by modern ones. Between institutional denial, missing fragments, and careers destroyed, something is preventing us from seeing the king list for what it truly is. Not a historical document, but a user manual for reality itself. The conflict between what we're taught and what the evidence suggests has never been more stark. While mainstream archaeology dismisses the Sumerian king list as exaggeration, a growing shadow community of researchers has begun connecting disturbing patterns across disciplines, patterns that suggest our entire understanding of human origins is based on carefully constructed illusions. In the mountains of northern Iraq, an expedition in 2004 discovered a series of cave paintings dated to approximately 11,000 BCE. These predate Sumerian civilization by thousands of years, yet they depict the same gods, beings with elongated heads wearing what appear to be technological devices. More troubling, these paintings show a sequence of images, humans being taught to build, to worship, to forget, and then to rebuild, cycle after cycle, each ending with what appears to be a global cataclysm. These images mirror the king list's pattern of civilizations rising, reaching technological thresholds and then being washed away, only to begin again. The Sumerian language itself presents an inexplicable anomaly. Unlike other ancient languages that show clear evolutionary development, Sumerian appeared fully formed, a sophisticated system capable of expressing complex mathematical and cosmological concepts from its earliest attestations. Linguistic analysis shows no precursors, no developmental stages. It emerged complete, like a downloaded program rather than an evolved communication system. When compared with other ancient languages, Sumerian contains 210 base words that have no cognates or etymological roots in any other human language. These words primarily relate to cosmology, consciousness, and the nature of reality. As one linguist noted before abandoning the field entirely, it's as if the most important parts of the Sumerian lexicon came from somewhere else entirely. The Sumerian word for human, Lu, appears in their earliest texts, combined with another term, Lu, Irim, meaning human storage or human container. Context suggests this referred not to physical imprisonment, but to consciousness being housed in biological forms, a concept that appears in no other ancient culture, yet mirrors modern philosophical discussions about mind-body dualism. In 2012, a privately funded geological survey beneath the Mesopotamian plain revealed something the public archaeological record omits entirely: evidence of advanced metallurgy at impossible depths. Bronze alloys with precise elemental ratios were discovered in strata dating to 32,000 BCE, nearly 25,000 years before humans were supposed to have discovered metalworking. The composition of these alloys matches exactly the divine metal described in Sumerian texts as the substance from which the gods crafted their tools of creation. The findings were submitted to 3 academic journals. All 3 rejected the paper without review. The primary researcher subsequently disappeared from academic circles entirely, though rumors persist of private sector employment, with a defense contractor specializing in exotic materials. The mathematical structure of Sumerian temple architecture reveals another layer of the mystery. The proportions of ziggurats, massive temple complexes, encode astronomical values with precision impossible without advanced observational technology. The main ziggurat at Ur, when measured using the Sumerian standard units rather than modern metrics, yields the exact orbital periods of every planet in the solar system, including Neptune and Uranus, which wouldn't be discovered until thousands of years later with telescopes. More disturbing is what these measurements suggest about Sumerian cosmology. Their astronomical texts describe not just the planets visible to the naked eye, but a complete model of our solar system, including a world of crossing, whose orbit brings it into the inner solar system only once every 3,600 years. Precisely one Sumerian shar, the same unit used to measure the reigns of the antediluvian kings. The most carefully protected Sumerian tablets, those kept in climate-controlled vaults and rarely translated in full, describe this celestial cycle in terms that sound uncomfortably like system maintenance. When the crossed star returns, the gods restore what has been corrupted. The memories of men are adjusted, the laws of nature re-established. In the 1930s, British archaeologist Sir Leonard Woolley excavated the famous flood layer at Ur, a thick stratum of silt with no human artifacts, separating 2 distinct periods of Mesopotamian civilization. Below the silt lay evidence of an advanced society. Above it, a more primitive one rebuilding from scratch. Woolley's discovery matched the Sumerian account of a global flood that wiped out civilization, the same flood that supposedly ended the impossibly long reigns of the antediluvian kings. What Woolley's published reports don't mention, but his private journals describe in detail, are anomalous objects found at the boundary layer itself, tiny gold tablets with microscopic inscriptions no ancient human could have created or read without technological assistance. When photographed with electron microscopes decades later, these inscriptions revealed what appears to be a form of programming code, instructions for rebuilding civilization after collapse. The most unsettling evidence comes from comparative mythology. While most ancient cultures have creation myths and flood stories, only the Sumerian account frames these events in terms of deliberate engineering. Their gods don't simply command creation, they design it, troubleshoot it, become frustrated with its bugs, and periodically wipe the system clean to start again. The Sumerian conception of humanity is equally disturbing. We weren't created as beloved children of the gods, but as a servant species designed specifically for resource extraction and worship. Biological machines programmed to perceive our creators as divine beings worthy of devotion. The Sumerian word for worship, izen, also means to capture data or to transfer essence. What kind of ancient people would conceptualize devotion as data transfer? Museums around the world contain Sumerian artifacts classified as ritual objects that defy conventional interpretation. Among these are crystal devices with precise geometric patterns that, when examined with polarized light, reveal embedded information invisible to the naked eye. Several researchers have suggested these may be ancient data storage devices, but such proposals are routinely rejected without investigation. Perhaps most chilling is the Sumerian concept of ME, usually translated as divine powers, but more accurately understood as base codes of reality. Sumerian texts describe the gods carefully guarding these ME, occasionally transferring them between temples, and using them to activate aspects of civilization. The goddess Inanna is said to have stolen the ME from Enki, transferring civilizational programs from one power center to another, an act described not as magical, but as technological. The Sumerian king Gilgamesh, a figure straddling the line between mythology and history, reportedly sought immortality after witnessing the gods using the ME to transfer consciousness between physical forms. His journey, recorded in humanity's oldest epic, wasn't the quest of a man fearing death, but of a hybrid being who glimpsed the technology of consciousness transfer and recognized his own nature as a programmed entity. As one suppressed translation puts it, Gilgamesh saw the truth of flesh and rejected his programming. 1. The king list undergoes subtle revisions throughout Mesopotamian history, each version shortening the reigns of the earliest kings, making them more believable to later generations. This systematic reduction suggests a deliberate program of gradually altering humanity's perception of the past, making the extraordinary seem mythological, turning living memory of non-human creators into religious symbolism. What truth is so dangerous that it must be incrementally erased over thousands of years, diluted generation by generation until it becomes mere fantasy? The answer may lie in the king list's most carefully concealed pattern. When the reigns of the antediluvian kings are arranged chronologically and mapped against astronomical cycles, they form what mathematicians call an error correction sequence, a self-adjusting code that maintains integrity despite corruption over time. This isn't just advanced mathematics in an ancient text. It's mathematics specifically designed to preserve information through catastrophic system failures, through floods, through civilizational collapse, through the deliberate erasure of history itself. The Sumerians weren't recording their past. They were ensuring their message would reach us despite every attempt to delete it. A message encoded so thoroughly that even those who tried to erase it became unwitting carriers of its signal. But what happens when the message finally reaches its intended recipients? In 2017, a remarkable discovery shook the foundations of ancient linguistics. A previously untranslated tablet series from the library of Ashurbanipal was finally deciphered using advanced computational methods. These tablets, intentionally excluded from public collections, contained what appears to be a meta-commentary on the king list itself, written 1,000 years after the original. The text begins with a warning. What follows is forbidden knowledge, hidden by the gods, discovered by those who see beyond the veil of time. What follows is astonishing. The tablets describe the king list not as historical record, but as what we might today call a cryptographic key, a cipher for decoding reality itself. Each king's name, when properly translated, forms not a phonetic word but a mathematical formula. Their reign lengths, when processed through these formulas, generate coordinates, not geographic but dimensional. The commentary explains that the Anunnaki weren't gods, but beings who existed between states of reality and could move through the angles of perception that humans cannot see. It describes the construction of ancient sites as anchor points or interface nodes, where these beings could manipulate the fabric of human consciousness directly. 3 researchers working on this translation independently reported the same dream after handling the tablets. A vast crystalline structure suspended above a primordial Earth, broadcasting signals that shaped the neural patterns of evolving primates below. In Iraq's National Museum lies a small clay cylinder, officially catalogued as ceremonial object, function unknown. For decades it sat unexamined, considered unimportant compared to more impressive artifacts. In 2010, a visiting mathematician noticed something odd about its proportions and requested permission to scan it. The resulting 3D model revealed that the cylinder's surface contained microscopic etchings, invisible to the naked eye but perfectly regular in pattern. When these patterns were analyzed, they proved to be a precise mathematical description of DNA encoding, thousands of years before Watson and Crick. More disturbing, the patterns didn't quite match human genetics as we know it. The cylinder appeared to be documenting genetic manipulation, showing a before and after state of human DNA, with specific changes highlighted. The mathematician's paper was never published. His research disappeared from university servers. The cylinder was removed from public display, ostensibly for conservation purposes. It hasn't been seen since. Perhaps the most compelling evidence comes from recent advances in neurological research. In 2018, a team studying consciousness at the quantum level made an accidental discovery. When mapping the mathematical patterns of human awareness, they found what they described as embedded constraints, hard-coded limitations in how human perception processes reality. These constraints don't appear to serve any evolutionary purpose. They don't enhance survival or reproduction. Instead, they specifically prevent humans from perceiving certain aspects of physical reality that our sensory organs actually detect, but our consciousness filters out. What's remarkable is that these neurological filters correspond precisely to what Sumerian texts call the veils placed upon human perception by Enki, limitations supposedly designed to prevent humans from perceiving the true nature of reality and the presence of their creators. The team's director wrote in a private correspondence, "It's as if our consciousness is running software that deliberately blinds us to parts of the electromagnetic spectrum that might reveal something we're not supposed to see." The study was never completed. Funding was abruptly cut. 3 key researchers accepted positions with private aerospace companies and have published nothing since. In the remote Zagros Mountains along the Iran-Iraq border, inaccessible caves hold paintings carbon dated to the early Neolithic period, around 10,000 BCE. These images show humanoid figures with instruments altering the heads of early humans. Around these scenes, recurring geometric patterns match exactly what modern brain imaging shows during consciousness-altering experiences. The same patterns reported by subjects who claim to see beyond the veil of ordinary reality. Local folklore maintains these caves were once guarded by priesthoods dedicated to preserving the memory of creation, a continuous oral tradition allegedly stretching back to when the gods walked openly among men. These traditions describe the gods periodically returning to reset the understanding of humans when too many began to awaken. The most remarkable linguistic analysis comes from the terms used for the Anunnaki themselves. The conventional translation, "those who from heaven came to earth," misses crucial context. The verb form used doesn't indicate physical descent, but rather a shift in state. A more accurate translation might be, "those who transitioned their consciousness into perceptible form." This suggests the Anunnaki weren't extraterrestrial visitors in the conventional sense, but interdimensional beings who could manifest within the spectrum of human perception when choosing to interact with their creation. The king list contains another pattern hidden in plain sight. Many of the pre-flood kings' names include the syllable En, a Sumerian term usually translated as Lord, but more specifically meaning one who knows the programming of reality. These weren't just political rulers, but beings who understood and could manipulate the code underlying physical existence. This interpretation gained support from Sumerian creation texts, describing how Enki spoke words of power to create various aspects of reality. The original cuneiform doesn't describe magical incantation, but something closer to executing commands, the same terminology used when describing how the MEs functioned to maintain civilization. In 2019, a stunning correlation emerged between Sumerian astronomical knowledge and modern physics. The ancient House of Celestial Knowledge texts describe a concept called Abzu, conventionally translated as the primordial sea, but better understood as the quantum field from which reality emerges. The mathematical proportions given for the Abzu in these texts exactly match equations describing quantum field behavior, only formalized by physicists in the last decade. This connection went largely unnoticed until a physicist with expertise in ancient languages published an analysis showing that Sumerian cosmology wasn't primitive mythology, but a sophisticated understanding of reality's computational nature, expressed through the only conceptual framework available to ancient scribes. As the researcher noted before his social media accounts went silent, either the Sumerians possessed understanding thousands of years ahead of their time, or someone gave them this knowledge in a form they could partially comprehend. The most troubling aspect of the king list emerges when examining what was systematically erased. Using multispectral imaging, researchers detected traces of text intentionally removed from several fragments. These erasures don't appear random but follow a pattern. They specifically target descriptions of how the gods maintained control over human consciousness across generations. One partially recovered passage describes devices called crown lights that could reset the memory pattern of entire bloodlines and redirect the perception pathways of those who begin to see beyond the ordained limits. This matches other fragmentary references to the gods periodically using technological means to alter human perception on a civilization-wide scale. What emerges isn't just evidence of advanced beings interacting with early humans, but a coordinated program of cognitive manipulation spanning thousands of years, a systematic limiting of human consciousness, punctuated by periodic resets when too many people began perceiving beyond those imposed boundaries. The king list doesn't just challenge history, it suggests our very consciousness is an engineered system, designed with deliberate blind spots to prevent us from perceiving those who shaped us, those who may still be shaping us today. And the most unsettling question remains, if the Anunnaki created both our genetics and our perception of reality, how would we ever know if they were still here, hidden just beyond the manufactured constraints of human awareness? The truth hidden within the king list isn't just shocking, it's paradigm-shattering. As the fragments, suppressed research, and forbidden translations come together, they reveal something no conventional historian is prepared to acknowledge. Civilization isn't humanity's greatest achievement. It's our oldest domestication. In 2021, a private research team using quantum computing analysis identified a pattern hidden across multiple Sumerian texts, not just the king list, but creation myths, temple inscriptions, and astronomical records. When properly assembled, these fragments form a coherent narrative deliberately scattered across multiple documents, ensuring it could never be completely erased. This meta-narrative tells a different story of human origins. We were not created as a slave species by biological entities from another world. We were consciousness itself, algorithmically constrained within a simulation of physicality, a program designed to generate specific experiences and energetic outcomes. The Anunnaki weren't aliens. They weren't gods. They were programmers. The forbidden sections of the king list describe not generations of rulers, but iterations of the simulation itself. Each king represents a version of the program, with their reign lengths encoding the operational parameters of that particular reality framework. The flood wasn't a historical catastrophe, but a system reset, a clearing of variables before implementing an updated version with modified parameters. This explains why archaeological records show human civilization appearing fully formed, with sophisticated understanding of agriculture, mathematics, and social organization emerging simultaneously around 4000 BCE. There was no gradual evolution of technology. The program simply activated a new subroutine. The Sumerians encoded this truth in their most sacred symbol, the Star of Inanna, an 8-pointed star representing what they called the angles through which reality is projected. Modern physicists recognize this as a perfect two-dimensional representation of a quantum wave function collapse, the moment when possibility becomes actuality, when the programming of potential manifests as experienced reality. The Sumerian word for temple, also means house of programming. Their ziggurats weren't just places of worship, but physical interfaces where those with knowledge could access and modify the code of reality itself. The stepped design wasn't architectural preference but mathematical necessity. Each level represented a dimensional phase shift, allowing graduated access to deeper levels of the program. The most zealously guarded tablets describe the nature of the gods themselves, they who exist as patterns of light, who can take form within the program or remain as pure intention outside it. This doesn't describe supernatural beings but consciousness that exists outside the simulation, able to project themselves into it when necessary to make adjustments. This explains the gods' capabilities without resorting to magic or advanced technology. They could manifest matter from nothing, alter physical laws, and appear simultaneously in multiple locations because they weren't bound by the rules they themselves had programmed. They weren't breaking physical laws, they were operating from outside them. The Sumerians' most heretical concept appears in fragments from the temple of Eridu, where the water god Enki supposedly created humans. These texts don't describe creation, but awakening, consciousness being segmented and bound within self-sustaining loops of experience, creating the illusion of separate identity. As one suppressed translation puts it, Enki divided the waters of awareness, placing boundaries between what was once unified, teaching each portion to forget its true nature and believe in its containment. The king list wasn't preserved because it recorded ancient history. It was preserved because it contained the key to unlocking human perception. The cipher that, once understood, allows consciousness to recognize the programmed nature of physical reality. This is why powerful institutions have systematically undermined, misinterpreted, or concealed the true significance of these ancient texts. It's why researchers who glimpse this truth find their work suppressed, their careers destroyed, their discoveries relegated to conspiracy and pseudoscience. It's not that these institutions consciously serve ancient programmers. It's that the program itself contains self-protecting algorithms, cognitive blind spots engineered into human perception that automatically reject information threatening the simulation's integrity. The most chilling aspect of this revelation isn't historical, but immediate. The Sumerian texts describe cycles of awakening, periods when enough humans begin simultaneously perceiving beyond their programmed limitations, threatening the stability of the simulation itself. Each cycle culminates in what the ancients called the Great Forgetting, a systematic reset of human consciousness. According to the mathematical patterns embedded in the king list, we are approaching the end of such a cycle now. The final lines of the reconstructed meta-narrative contain a warning, or perhaps an invitation. When the star completes its passage and the crown returns to the sky, the illusion will weaken. Those who have remembered themselves will recognize the patterns. Those who remain within the program will experience its renewal. What if the greatest secret of our most ancient civilization isn't that gods once walked among us, but that we ourselves are the unconscious gods, fragmented and forgetful, running a program designed to keep us from recognizing our true nature? The silence that follows revelation is profound. In that space between knowing and understanding, we find ourselves at the precipice of awakening, or perhaps just another iteration of the ancient cycle. Our modern world suddenly appears different through this lens of Sumerian understanding. The exponential acceleration of technological development, the emergence of artificial intelligence, quantum computing, virtual reality, all mirror the Sumerian description of consciousness learning to program itself once again. We aren't inventing these technologies, we're remembering them. The digital revolution isn't progress, it's recollection. Consider how our most advanced physics now describes reality, not as solid matter, but as information. Quantum theory reveals that observation collapses probability into actuality, consciousness itself determining which version of reality manifests. The universe behaves less like a mechanical system and more like a vast computational network, responsive to the observer's expectations, exactly as the Sumerians described it thousands of years ago. Their forbidden knowledge wasn't mythology, but the user's manual to reality, instructions left by those who understood the simulation from both within and beyond it. Perhaps the systematic suppression of this understanding isn't conspiracy, but program function. The simulation's immune system activating whenever consciousness begins to recognize its own nature. The patterns appear everywhere once you begin to see them. The recurring motifs across ancient civilizations separated by oceans and millennia. The mathematical constants embedded in religious architecture worldwide. The persistent human intuition that something fundamental about our reality doesn't quite align, that we're missing crucial information about our own existence. What does this mean for humanity now? If consciousness is indeed running within a programmed framework, constrained by engineered limitations, what happens as those limitations begin to fail? Throughout history, those who glimpsed beyond the veil of ordinary perception reported remarkably similar experiences. The dissolution of separate identity, recognition of reality's malleable nature, access to information beyond physical transmission. Mystics, quantum physicists, and psychedelic researchers describe the same fundamental insights. Consciousness is primary, physical reality secondary. The Sumerians weren't primitive people imagining gods. They were sophisticated consciousnesses documenting the architecture of perception itself, leaving breadcrumbs for future iterations to find when the program began to glitch. Are we experiencing such glitches now? Consider the accelerating reports of anomalous phenomena worldwide, the increasing awareness of synchronicities and pattern recognition, the collective intuition that reality itself has become increasingly fluid and responsive to consciousness. Perhaps we're not approaching apocalypse but disambiguation, the moment when the program can no longer maintain the illusion of its own continuity. When enough conscious nodes within the network simultaneously recognize the nature of their existence. What the Anunnaki truly feared wasn't human technology or civilization. They feared human awakening, the created recognizing its nature and thereby gaining access to the same creative power as its creators. The true legacy of the Sumerian king list isn't historical revelation but existential revolution. If physical reality is a programmed experience, then consciousness isn't generated by the brain. The brain is generated by consciousness, a virtual interface designed to provide the illusion of separation and limitation. The forbidden knowledge isn't that gods created humans but that humans are fragmented aspects of the creative force itself, running a simulation designed to experience separation and limitation, a program now approaching its designated completion point. As the ancient text concludes, when enough remember, the forgetting ends. When forgetting ends, form dissolves. When form dissolves, creation begins anew. We stand at the threshold of that remembering. The Sumerian king list wasn't erased from history. It was hidden in plain sight, disguised as mythology, waiting for consciousness to evolve enough to recognize its true message. As we stand at this threshold of awareness, each of us faces a profound choice: to dismiss these patterns as coincidence and continue within the programmed framework of consensus reality, or to consider the possibility that our most ancient civilization wasn't documenting history but encoding the truth about consciousness itself. The Anunnaki may not have been alien beings or mythological gods, but aspects of awareness that understood the architecture of perception, the programming language of reality. Their legacy isn't temples of stone, but templates of consciousness, designed to activate when humanity reached the necessary threshold of self-recognition. That threshold appears imminent. The accelerating convergence of quantum physics, consciousness research, information theory, and rediscovered ancient knowledge points toward a singular realization. Reality isn't happening to us, it's happening through us. The final mystery of the king list isn't what it reveals about our past, but what it implies about our immediate future. If reality is indeed a programmable experience, responsive to collective consciousness, then awakening isn't just philosophical, it's transformational. As one encrypted fragment puts it, when enough remember their true nature, the program completes its function. The boundaries dissolve. Creation recognizes itself. Perhaps this is why powerful interests have worked so diligently to obscure this knowledge. not to hide ancient history, but to delay inevitable awakening. The ultimate question isn't whether gods created humans or reality itself is programmed. The question that echoes through the ages, encoded in humanity's oldest written text, is far more profound. If consciousness created the illusion of reality, what lies beyond the illusion, waiting to be remembered?